Hi kids, it's Bunny with another junk journal, and this one is a fashion journal, and as you can see, it is hardback. As you can hear, it is hardback, made from scratch. It has a pretty picture on the front and some lace and a vintage brooch. And beautiful, beautiful fabric. And before we start, I wanted to let you know that I'm including 2 miniature journals, which I would put in the big journal, but they make it too fat, and you can see it's already really fat. But I'll open one of them. I'll open the littlest one and give you a taste of what they're like. I put little teeny weeny tags and little ephemera like tickets, journaling card, and there's interesting things to look at. There's a little bag that has something in it. And so the big one's much like that also. So now on to the main one. I will take off the golden sash. The golden sash. And open it up, and then I'll need to readjust the camera. There we go. I guess that'll work. And as you can see, it has a lace pocket on the front with a journaling card. All journaling cards are blank on the back, so you can write on them. Here is an envelope in which I have put a little note for whoever buys the journal, which tells them about the journal and how it can be used. And we've got a little wax thingy there. What do you call it? Anyway, going through, we have a tuck with a journaling card and a tag. Tags are also mostly blank on the back, so you can write on them. And here's a small glassine envelope, and inside are a couple of vintage stamps, vintage postage stamps. And there's lace on the edges of some of the pages. This one has some sparkles. And they're coffee dyed pages throughout you can write on. And it's a page from a vintage book. Here's an interesting handmade paper. This is also from a vintage book or magazine. This is vintage wallpaper. And I've got little clusters and things throughout to keep it interesting. Here is a vintage photograph. And this is a bunch of ladies, 1935. They're in Burma. I think they're missionaries or something like that. And here's another journaling card and a vintage library card. And here's a little charm. It's a picture of a lady. This is vellum on which I printed a pretty picture. And in this little glassine bag, I have some vintage buttons for you. This is vintage sheet music cover. And more vintage book pages. I splattered the the coffee dyed pages with an ink spray that looks kind of golden. Makes the pages look a little more interesting. This is from, I believe it was 1917 magazine. I can't remember the name of the magazine now, but some fashions of the time. As you can see, it was a little bit fragile, not too bad. Here is an envelope flip out in which we have a vintage playing card and another fashion journal card. This is a vintage label, liquor label. Back to the sheet music. Here's another bag with a pretty journaling card in it. More vellum. The vintage fashion show going on. In here we have a journaling card and a cute tag. Did I knock something out? No, that was it. Okay. Whoops. And handmade paper, vintage book page, a vintage ticket on there, ticket stub. Pardon my sniffing, huh? It's winter. And that was the first signature. Second signature has, oh, and these pockets, some of them are made from vintage instructions in a vintage pattern, clothing pattern. And here's another photograph from 1935 showing some children and a dog. And another pretty tag. I can't think of that word today. From a vintage book. Here is some coffee dyed ledger paper with a little charm. And we're halfway through, according to the clock, so I better get going. More vintage music. This is from a vintage first aid manual. There's more of the 1917 fashions. Here's a journaling card and another glassine envelope. Inside is a little miniature vintage photograph. And this is from a vintage magazine. These go together. A vintage photograph that I glued onto this large pocket, which has a large journaling card and a love letter from 1945 from a soldier to his wife. And here's a vintage postcard, journaling card, and some vintage needles from Singer. They've been around a long time, actually. Here's more 1917. Here is a pretty from an Indian Indian ribbon with pretty sparkles on it. Here's another 1935 picture of a cremation ceremony in Burma, complete with an elephant statue, tag, vintage playing card from Monopoly. This is a glassy newspaper page. Excuse me. There's a little flower charm. There's another little envelope with another miniature vintage photograph in it. A journaling card and a tag. And as we go on, it's vintage page from a book, more vintage wallpaper in this bag. This little journaling card. Here's vellum with a pretty picture on it from a vintage fashion shoot. Here are some just little cloth samples. Vintage cookbook. Another flip out which has a vintage tobacco collector's card and another journaling card. And on this side is a pretty vintage postcard. I think they're from the 1920s, the postcards. And I did a little texture paste here. More 1917 fashions. And here's a little teeny weeny envelope, and inside, trust me, it's got teeny weeny stuff inside. You'll see if you buy it. And the other half of music sheet. And this vintage something or other cookbook. Here's a paper bag. Inside are various stickers and vintage things, which I don't have time to show you because the clock is ticking and my camera cuts off. More vellum. Another bag with journaling card. Another procession from 1935 in Burma. Journaling card. Journaling card. And let's see how the time's going. Oh, got 4 more minutes. We have more fashion for your delight. And another charm. More from the vintage first aid manual. And vintage book. This is from a vintage children's book. This is from a vintage Monopoly game. And more pretty fashions from the past. All from the past. And this is from a vintage magazine. And here is another big envelope. And in it is a big journaling card. And a small journaling card. More fashion. This is a plasticized bookmark with a ruler on the back, which could be useful. And there's another vintage photograph inside this little envelope. Sorry I'm rushing, but my camera will cut off. And we're almost done. It's another vintage Burma photograph. More fashions. And a pretty vintage postcard from the 1920s. And then here on the back, I have a couple of journaling cards and another 1935 Burma photograph. And I made it before the clock ran out. That is my fashion journal. You can find it in Mimosa Morn Journals on Etsy. And thanks for joining me. See you next time.